In my opinion, this is one of the most spectacular insects on planet Earth. It's called the green orchid bee, and it's been introduced accidentally in southern Florida, but their native range is in Central America down to the top part of South America. But it's a part of a member of a group of bees that I want to talk about today, and that's the orchid bees. One of the reasons that I love bees so much is that they are sort of nature's Swiss Army knife. Bee, if you ever have the opportunity to look at a bee under a microscope, you're going to see little spines places in, like a sort of spine that comes out of the front leg, or a basket on the hind legs that carry pollens. They're all covered with brushes and combs and spines. This is the front elbow of a honeybee showing an antenna cleaner that is built in. This is a honeybee pollen basket. There's also something kind of romantic about an animal that gets everything that it needs pretty much from flowers. Orchid bees are members of the family Apidae, which is the same as the stingless bees that I spoke about a few videos ago, and the native honeybee. This, however, is a more solitary bee in the same group. They're closely related, but they're native to the New World tropics, like I mentioned. One way to tell the orchid bees is they have these unusually long tongues, and if you look at it, there's this long tongue coming out, and they can't roll it up or fold it or retract it or anything like that. It's always just kind of hanging out of its mouth. Like the other Apidae, females have these pollen baskets on their hind legs, which is like a comb where they store balls of pollen and they carry them back to their nests. They also build their nests in these small cavities. They use wax and they use plant resins to construct the cells of their nest that they provision with pollen and with nectar for their eggs when they deposit them. So far, there doesn't seem too much out of the ordinary of this story, but here is where it starts to get kind of weird. So this is a picture of a male orchid bee, and male orchid bees look a lot like females, except instead of pollen baskets on their hind legs, they have this structure. And the structure is hollow, and it has a little hole in the side. It's all in their hind legs, and it's filled with this spongy material. It's kind of hollow, except for the spongy material inside of there. And they use this, and they have these mop-like front feet. And they use these tools to collect odors, to collect perfumes from their environment. Now, males will occasionally visit flowers just for nectar to fuel themselves, but otherwise they spend all of their time collecting perfume oils and other perfumes from their environment. So they use these mop-like front feet to collect perfumes. And if you watch this guy here, he's using his front feet and he's kind of mopping up all the scent. This is clove oil that I've put on a paper towel, and he's soaking it up, and then he backs up and he hovers right in front of it, and you'll see he pulls his back legs forward and he sticks his front legs in those holes in their back compartments here. They look like motorcycle saddlebags, really. That's what they do. So you can see that that's what he's doing here. He's collecting perfume oils and storing it in his back legs. So why do they collect perfumes? Well, it was only really proven recently that they actually collect these perfumes because females find it attractive. So these males here are competing with each other to collect the most pungent perfume bouquet that they can collect. Of course, this is the green orchid bee, which is the one that's native, that is not native, but the one that is here in South Florida. The other orchid bees also do the same thing, and they often collect these perfumes that are species specific. So all the bees are not after the same perfumes. It varies depending on the species. Now, a very interesting thing that has happened is these bees have developed close relationships with bee orchids. Now, these orchids tend to produce, instead of nectar, which usually is what they use to get bees to come and pollinate, carry their pollen to another flower, they produce these perfumes, and the male bees will visit the flowers, they'll soak up the perfumes. In the meantime, they're also getting pollen on their bodies, and the next flower that they go to, they're going to carry that pollen there, and that orchid is going to get pollinated. So this is an example of what we call coevolution. And coevolution is when two animals or two organisms become dependent on one another, and they co-evolve, and they cannot survive independently without each other. So these bees have their orchids, and the orchids are usually bees are specific to the bees. That's another thing that happens is that the orchids will sometimes mimic a female bee, and the male will come and he'll try to mate with that female bee, but in the process he's being fooled and he is collecting pollen and pollinating a flower when he tries to do the same thing to the next flower. An interesting sidebar in the case of this green orchid bee. This bee was brought to South Florida accidentally, and it was brought here without its orchid. Its orchid is still just in Mexico. It didn't come with the bee. But these bees seem to be doing fine, and they collect other odors. They'll love clove oil. You could put clove oil out and they'll come to that. You also hear people talking about how they always come and visit their basil because they love the way basil smells. And they'll go land on basil and sop up all the oils and everything that smells good and put it in their hind legs. Now these male bees are so obsessed with collecting odors that there even have been reports of them attacking other male bees and ripping their legs off and running off with their legs, presumably to go and rob the odors out of their legs and put it in their own legs.
What we don't know.
This has been a very brief intro on the orchid bees. It's a huge subject. But what we don't know is lots of the basic biology questions of orchid bees that haven't been answered. We have this one species here in Florida, which is great, but there's a lot of species in Central and South America. And they all are going to be different depending on what odors they're collecting or what nest source sites they're using. Another interesting thing that we need to study more is the sociality in the orchid bees. Now, orchid bees are solitary bees, so a female goes off and sets out on her own. She doesn't have a whole hive with her when she goes somewhere. However, they do have their first daughters will often remain in the main nest and assist their mother with provisioning. And this is seen as a rudimentary first step in sociality emerging. And in the family that they're in, the Apidae, there's a lot of very, very, very highly social bees. There are the honeybees, which are one of the most social species that we know. There's also the bumblebees. So this rudimentary sociality in the orchid bees can lead us to a better understanding of how sociality evolves in the insects. One thing that I've noticed here in South Florida, if you have orchid bee nests, you go in and you collect them and go look at them. There's sometimes a disease that they get, and it looks an awful lot like a disease that honeybees get called chalk brood. And it's a fungal disease that affects the larvae and it turns them into these chalk-like mummies, basically, of bees. And so I've observed that here. I've never actually sent them off and tried to get them diagnosed. But I believe it's the same infectious agent that causes chalk brood in the honeybees. It could also help us get a better understanding of the conservation status of these bees. They live in places which are very dangerously close to having habitat loss and potentially going extinct.